All right, we're in Mark 3. And please, if you got something to add, correct, or whatever, the lesson, please say it. Talk about it. It's an open class. Anybody can talk and should. Just because I'm standing up here, sure, don't make it a good class. If you really want a good class, bring in something to class to make it good. Mark 3. 2 weeks ago, we were talking about, it was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, however long ago, last class. We talked about this, them going through the grain fields, picking field, and how the Pharisees were adamant that that was wrong to do because it was be viewed as work on the Sabbath, which was not, of course, true or to do. Anyway, I was correcting what I said because I said something about it they were doing wrong, and that's not true. I was corrected after class, and that was a lawful thing at that time to just go through where is that? Leviticus, whatever. He's looking it back up. I'm sorry? It could be in along with Leviticus 26 because there's a lot of things that they couldn't do there. If you go back to I did look that part up. But they weren't doing unlawful things, although the Pharisees said they was. And why were the Pharisees thinking it was?
Leviticus 23:24.
I heard somebody, but I couldn't hear what you said.
Leviticus 23:24 is where you can go through your neighbor's grain field and pick what you can eat.
Okay.
You could sell it.
Big enough to eat. Okay. So they weren't wrong. And Jesus allowed it anyway, being Lord of the Sabbath. But anyway, there are some things that come about it in today's lesson 2, where, well, to begin with, we got to back up.
Deuteronomy 23, I'm sorry.
Deuteronomy
23.
Okay, probably, if it's in Deuteronomy, it's probably in Leviticus too. All right, let's see if I do this right. All right. And we have, I want to talk a little bit about the Pharisees. Why were the Pharisees like they were? I did do a little study on this. I mean, and I think sometimes we get Pharisaical in the way we do stuff. But if you go back to Nehemiah and look there, do you remember what was Nehemiah's job, if you will? Now, he was a cupbearer for Cyrus. Was Cyrus? That's a bad thing when you're pulling stuff out of memory, your memory ain't very long. But anyway, Nehemiah was to go back and to teach the law so that people knew what the law was. Do you remember that? And at least what my studies said, and I'm going to accept it as being true. And also in Nehemiah, they made an agreement among the people who came back to Jerusalem. What was the agreement? What did they agree to do? I believe that's in Nehemiah 9:38. Somebody look that up and read it.
9:38, and because of all this, we make a sure covenant and write it, and our princes, Levites, and priests seal unto it.
Okay. And the agreement was that they were going to follow the law because they had got so far away from it, so it caused them to go off into captivity to begin with, and they didn't want to do it again. And so, being a little easy on the Pharisees, they watched it very closely so that they wouldn't be carried off again. But they took it and made laws of their own, if you will, through how they read it and put it to work. And we're going to find that again a little bit here in verse 4, it says, and he said to them, is it lawful to do good? They brought a guy in and he healed his hand. Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath? Save the life or kill? Notice they don't say anything. Now, it angers Jesus, actually, of the way they're looking at it. Could he do good or bad on the Sabbath? Does that overrule the fact that they were not supposed to work on the Sabbath? But he heals this man right there in front of him, and the Pharisees are mad. Now, there's kind of a verse I've got up there that I dread this verse. What does James 4:17 say? I'm sorry.
For him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, it is sin.
Yeah. I hate that verse. It's a verse we need to know. He that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. You ever drive by somebody sitting on the side of the road, they got the hood up, flat tire, whatever, and you think about, I'd stop and help them? Am I wrong in saying that that's kind of what we're supposed to do? Would it be wrong in saying that's my sin that I carry because I'm in a hurry? I can't get time to stop and take care of this or help this guy. He that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him is sin. Now that's James writing, and he's one of the elders, if you will, of the Jerusalem church. And so this is it's not a new teaching by no means. Just here Jesus has run against it here. Verse 5, and looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and that's when he goes ahead and tells the man, stretch forth your hand. Does anybody here have a problem like I do of seeing something that I should take care of and not? I'm the only one who does that, but I guess I have to worry about it.
Well, I think everybody has that opportunity to grow as a Christian, to see things that they should do and they end up not doing it. But, the last hitchhiker I picked up tried to sell me marijuana.
Well, there is you were tested, okay? Yeah, I think you've got a chance to both do good or do harm. That's true. I know in my own case, it's been a number of years ago. I won't tell how long ago, but I had the same deal. I was flying home, and I was going to get home fairly early in the afternoon, so I was really, and I went through Ark City, and it's only 10 miles from Ark City to Winfield. And as I went by, there was this couple with their hood up, and he was there with a deal. I see him down here all the time. The baby needs food. I have, parked in front of a Walmart. And so anyway, I made it all the way to Strawford Field, which was 5 miles. And this verse kept. It's a bad thing about having a memory that works once in a while. And so I turned around and I go back and he said, what do you need? And he gave me a list of stuff that the baby needed. It was diapers and, baby food and stuff like that. So I said, I'll be back. I go into Walmart. When I walk into Walmart, there was this lady standing there, and she says, are you going to help them people? I said, well, yeah, I guess good. That's kind of a stop for her. She said, good, I'll help you. Okay. So we go out and we get a cart. Now, I've got about 5 things I'm going to put in this. Kind of like going shopping with my wife. You know, we only got 5 things to pick at. Every time we go by something, she said, well, that would have some of this, and I'd have some. I ended up having a pretty good sized cart. And I thought, well, she's going to help me. I go push it up to the checkout and start putting stuff on the deal and look around, and she's gone. Well, I go ahead and got it and paid for it, but I feel like for sure that it was a set up deal. But anyway, they got food. I did what I was supposed to, as far as I was concerned, and went on. But so, you know, I think there could be things. Now, did the baby need it? Everything that I put in there, I know the baby needed. Now, what she put in there, yeah, it could have been something that helped pretty good. And I know that, you know, there are people who do those kind of things. But anyway, I didn't have to worry about James 4:17 that particular time. I've done it a lot of times that I didn't. But notice in verse 6. Well, wait a minute. I got to back up here to my slide. Crowds from all around I've got there. Where were they at during this particular time? Where were they at?
The withered hand was in the synagogue, if you're asking them.
Okay, yeah, but what area? You'd have to read back before that to know where they were at. And I think it's kind of important they're not in Jerusalem, is what I want you to realize. They're not in Jerusalem. They're in Capernaum. And where was Capernaum? Up around the Sea of Galilee. And that's several miles from Jerusalem, but it's still in the old Israel. It would be in the new one that's there. I guess there's a picture of it. Jerusalem would be down around the Dead Sea, which is the smaller or the bigger lake that's on that particular. And they're in the top where it's around the Sea of Galilee, on the west side of the Jordan River, which Jordan River starts there. So. Okay, like I said, if you want something out of the lesson, you pretty well got to help me with it. It mentions the Pharisees and the Herodians. Who are the Herodians?
They were the ones that followed Herod, and they weren't necessarily friends with the Pharisees, but they kind of joined together in the common cause against Christ.
Right. Why did the Pharisees and the Herodians both did want to keep Rome in control? Now, Rome was controlling them, not Herod, but Herod was held on the throne only because of the Romans. Why would they want that go? Why would they want to keep Herod in control? Or the Herodians? Kind of like talking about the Democrats and Republicans. They were just a political party. But why would they want to keep him there?
Well, the Pharisees were kind of leaders among the people, popular with the people, and they didn't want to lose that.
That's true, and they were allowed to stay there because the Romans were allowing them. And you know, there's another thing here too that I think it was a good economy for them to be living in. The economy was good under Herod. A lot of building stuff going on and people worked. They had a lot of good things. The economy was great at that particular time. Look at all the building products. You really should do a study sometime about Herod's building. He was marvelous. He was a psychopath, but he was excellent when it comes down to building stuff. Stuff's still standing today there. And you've seen the Western Wall on TV? All that was built by Herod. If you know what the Western, you ever seen a picture of the Western Wall where they puts the prayers and they stick them in the tracks? That was the, if you feel, the foundation of the temple. Do a study sometime about Herod. You'll see how great, and Jesus, when the guys, I guess that's later on in the book of Mark, but they were walking around talking about the wonderful buildings. It was marvelous. And things, he did things that we can't really do today with manpower. Of course, he had slave power. That makes it help you put whatever you want in there. But they moved stones miles to put in this thing. And they heaved them with manpower. They're simple things. I love archaeology. And I get to watch stuff all the time. We've got I forget what the name of it is. I do get a magazine called Biblical Archaeology. You know the thing about biblical archaeology? They haven't found one thing that's not discussed in the Bible. And if they find some things, oh my God, I'm chasing rabbits. But do some study about where we got the Bible. There was a man I want to tell this. William Ramsey. Does anybody know who William Ramsey is? Sir William Ramsey, actually, is what he was. Anybody ever heard of him? He won the Nobel Prize back in 1900-something or other, and put gases on the periodic table. He was a skeptic about the Bible. He said it's just a bunch of stories, most of it made up. And he was a Nobel Prize winner because he discovered argon specifically, but that he was a physicist. I can't say that with both teeth very easy. But he discovered argon and said the Bible isn't nothing but a collection of stories and myths. And he was going to prove it. So when he won this $1 million or whatever it was, he headed over to Turkey, what's now Turkey, and Asia Minor, and began to study and looking for. He found it and proved, for instance, that it said there wasn't such thing as a proconsul in the Roman world. And he found inscriptions proving, and Pilate was a proconsul for Judea. They couldn't find him anywhere else. And so he was going to prove it wrong. He found out it was right. And he became a good historian, if you will, based on Acts and Luke. But y'all, some of that sort of stuff. Now, this brings up something, and I'm probably going to chase too long here. If you had been there and seen Jesus with the hand and corrected, would you be a believer in Jesus Christ? Is there anybody in here who has doubts about Jesus Christ? That he lived and walked? Because the world does. But go back and study the things that are, I think that he is, let's go back. I got to back up. 2 weeks ago, what was Jesus' mission? He says it himself back in chapter 2. What did he want to do? Do you want to go heal people?
Seek and save the lost.
I'm sorry?
Seek and save the lost.
Came to save the lost, to teach, to preach. That's what he says in his own words. I came to preach, and he wants to go do that. Didn't mean he didn't want to help people, but he wanted to preach and get people really believing in God. The people back then, there was doubters back then too. Look at the Romans, look at the Greeks, look at all of them. Now, Cyrus was a believer. Stretching it just a little bit. But Cyrus did believe in him. That's the reason he sends the Israelites back and tells them to learn God's law. Anyway, I chased this rabbit into a hole and I can't remember where I was going. But you and I don't get to see. We have this book that tells us about the manager. We don't get to see him. But we've got to be willing to put our life on the line for stuff here. And so this has got to be pretty solid. Okay, think about that for just a second. But anyway, back verse 6, we'll go back, get out of the hole. Pharisees and the Herodians were against him. Why would they have been against him? I want you to realize that politics has played a lot in the role all the way through here. They had to make a decision. They had to make choices. You and I got the same way. There's good and bad. We got to know what the difference is. We got to know what to do. Comments. I'm sinking here. All right, let's move on up here. He withdraws and we won't even talk about one. They wanted him to stay there. Verse 11, whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they would fall down before him and shout, "You are the Son of God." And he earnestly warned them not to tell who he was. Why? Why would they? I mean, that's what he came for. Why would he keep the unclean spirits from saying who? Anybody? Okay, hold up your hand if you're awake. Okay, I got a few. All right. Why would he not want them to tell who he was?
It says, and we're referencing, because they were untrustworthy.
They were untrustworthy?
Yeah, their testimony was untrustworthy.
That could have been one. Anybody else?
He told people also, I believe, and I remember somewhere him saying, because my time has not yet come.
Okay.
I took that to mean the time for him to die and be crucified.
Be crucified.
I think the principle is too, I mean, Satan can tell the truth, but do you want to go to him to hear what's right and what's wrong?
Which you kind of know what she was saying. Yeah.
I mean, what they were saying would have been true, but there's still the validity of, you don't want somebody relying on a means like that to find truth or to tell you what's true and what's not.
And I think there's another thing too, based on the study I did, that all the fulfillments that have been coming up that tells you and I that this was God. The fulfillments hadn't been made yet, or total. Of those scriptures that talks about it. Anybody else? See, there are people who can actually talk in this class. Okay, where we go next? Oh, that was the picture. All right, it chooses 12. And I really want to emphasize the differences between these different people. Just like we are here, a bunch of different people. But 12 men, if you will, from different areas, different thoughts, because it puts out who they were. For instance, let's start. One of them's a zealot. What does that mean? What's a zealot? We'll do it again. Wave if you're awake. What's a zealot? Somebody full of zeal. I'll go that far. Do we have any zealots today? I'm gonna step off for just a second here. I want you to think about somebody who might be considered a zealot, or has been considered a zealot. There was a man by the name of Dennis, don't go blank somewhere. Shot right in front of everybody. Who was that?
Charlie Kirk?
Charlie Kirk. Was he a zealot? Could he have been considered a zealot? Probably was. Yes.
Google says it's a first century Jewish politician or religious movement dedicated to violently overthrowing Roman rule in Judea.
Okay, that would have been true of a zealot then. So he didn't, the guy we're talking about, Kirk, didn't emphasize violent overthrow. The zealots did, Jewish zealots. But to put out, and did anybody say, well, he probably doesn't believe in God? But if anybody said that about Charlie Kirk, you may not agree with everything he said. I don't know. The only times I ever listened to him, I agreed with everything he said. He might did not go all the way. Because he didn't talk about baptism. He didn't talk about stuff, but he did talk about learning about God. But this Simon the Zealot was somebody who believed that it was all right to overthrow the Roman government. Okay? They wanted to overthrow the Roman government. Now, notice that Matthew is another one, is there. What did Matthew do? Levi.
Tax collector.
Tax collector. So he worked for the Roman government. Now, how do you think these two people got along, or would get along? Would be no, that's kind of like starting a board or whatever, and you have a Democrat and a Republican. They're going to get along with everything goes on? No. Maybe not much of any, but anyway, that's the way these two people would have been. And he puts them together in the same thing. And yet they do everything. What's an explanation? That's right. He says, your family's outside. And probably Jesus had already met some of these guys. No, he was. If you look back at some of them are named back in chapter 1. So he already called a few, but now he brings them all together. We're all named together there and what they're going to do. Even Judas Iscariot, who is going to betray him, hasn't so far. But there's such a crowd they can't even have a meal together. And they come and say your family's outside. And the family is saying, well, he lost his senses. You know, the way he's going with this. So on and so forth. And Jesus says, who is his family?
The ones that follow him.
Ones that's following him. Are we his family? Are we a family?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, thank you. I think we're too. And you know, I've been a part of the family for years. And I've noticed that there are some differences anytime I go from one church to another, or a congregation to another. I hate to say one church to another, because that's very wrong to say. But from one congregation to another, there are things different in each one of them. But yet we're all the same family. And I've been very fortunate because I have moved and I have been part of the brethren in many different places, from Texas to Kansas to now Missouri. And there's one thing I can guarantee you that I found in every one of them. People that were good people who would help you, who would do their best to see that you were a part of a family. And that's one thing good about this family that's right here. And I've said it before. If you got problems, talk to somebody here. I guarantee you, everybody here wants the same thing, and that's get us all to heaven. And they'll do everything they can to help you get over whatever problems you've got so that you can be in heaven. And I hope to see every one of you when I get there. I do. And I hope you all want to see me there. Good, bad, or otherwise. Judy might not, but. But he wants us to be a family. I gotta look at my notes. In verse 24, of course, they're bringing trying everything they can to go against Jesus. His teaching is so, everybody thinks he's, he comes with authority, and everybody are trying to what do you call it? Blacklisting. But there in verse 24. If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a home is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. What president used that?
Lincoln.
I'm sorry?
Lincoln.
Lincoln. Right. We were talking about this nation, and there was a lot of problems in that. A civil war that we are thankful that didn't live through. And that's one thing that we as Christians cannot do. Be divided against ourselves. Because it does cause problems. Tell you another little story. When we fixed to move over here, I gotta think of his name, but he was a member of the church in Winfield. His dad had been a preacher up in the Dakotas when he was growing up. And so they never had 10 or 15 was about as big a congregation you ever had. And he and I was talking one time, and he said, after moving over, he said, I said, you ought to come over. There's church every place you go, there's church. He said, how big's West Plains? About the same size as Winfield. He said, you got problems. I said, what do you mean? He said, one congregation, there we had 60, 65. He said, to have that many deals, there's been a lot of splits. Never thought about that. But I see some over here, seen quite a bit. And was told when we was here, because we did ask, I wanted to go to a place where the church was strong, because where I lived was not strong. Kansas was not strong. As far as coming out of Texas, they had Church of Christ on every corner. Moved to Kansas, it wasn't there. So I struggled a little bit with those particular things. But anyway, I even had some people in this part of the country, because we started going to different congregations to learn a little bit about. I even had a few people in a congregation tell me, oh, you don't want to go there. They're wrong. Now, think about that for just a second. I was discouraged to go into some congregations. because other congregations thought that's wrong. And I hate to do that. You know the reason we named Harmony Hall? Harmony Hall? Not because we sing. We wanted everybody to be able to come in there and not feel like they can't come because some other congregation thinks it's wrong. Gospel truth. Anyway, for what it's worth, there it is. For chapter 3. Next week we'll get into chapter 4. You got anything to add? Now's the time to do it.